What's your biggest problem with Christianity?
My biggest problem with Christianity is the anti-intellectualism that is prevalent within certain Christian traditions, where we do not want to explore the evidence and follow where the evidence leads.
If the Bible says my people perish because of lack of knowledge, would you say many Christians are ignorant?
Yes, within particular traditions, primarily within the Pentecostal tradition of which I'm a part, there needs to be lots more improvement in terms of how we interact with scholarly materials beyond just simply claiming I'm filled with the Spirit, or I'm anointed by God, or I'm called by God, so I don't need to go to college, or I don't need to do university. We wouldn't do that with anything else, so why do it with our Christianity? I am an advocate for education and for scholarship, and that's one of my main problems, anti-intellectualism. I see the Spirit as complementing being educated and vice versa. Is that it?
Hello and welcome to the 91 podcast. Today with us in studio we have Dr. Marvin Sanguinetti. He's a researcher in theology and also a lecturer in biblical studies and Christian theology. Welcome, Dr. Marvin. It's great to have you in studio today.
Thank you, Gona. I really appreciate the invitation to be on the 91 podcast, and I look forward to our interactions today and that of the audience to come.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Marvin. As you must know, we did put out a question out there in public for our viewers. So we asked them to send in their different questions they might have about Christianity or theology or God. Because as you must know, so many people out there have so many questions, even me myself. I've been a Christian all my life, but I still have so many questions when it comes to the Bible and it comes to Christianity. And I find it difficult to actually find people who can answer those questions. Sometimes you might go to your church and then they might tell you just believe in faith, there's so many things about God that you don't know, but then it doesn't take away those questions that are still there, in my mind and in my heart.
Yeah, one of the problems that we have had, depending on your denomination, is the problem of anti-intellectualism. Primarily among the Pentecostal faith tradition itself, we have a tendency to underemphasize education and overemphasize what we would call in systematic theology, we would call it pneumatology, which is the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. So we emphasize this move of the Spirit since 1901, 1906, and some traditions 1913 to 16 and onwards. So those from the Pentecostal brand, we tend to have a more spirit-driven church and worship and liturgy as opposed to an intellectual, logical engagement. So you'll find a lot of what we would term in academia as the nominal churches. So that is Roman Catholicism, the Anglican Church of England, the Methodism. You'll find that they are very astute when it comes to theological learning and education. They put that on equal footing with us. In fact, that's an expression of spirituality as opposed to, juxtaposing spirituality over here and then we have education over here. To them, it's a merger and a complement between both. But in Pentecostalism, we're playing the catching up game, if you please.
So do you go to Pentecostal church? Are you a member?
Yes, I'm a member of a Pentecostal church. I lead one. So I'm very, hopefully, fairly familiar with the Pentecostal faith tradition, been in the Pentecostal faith tradition for 38 years.
Wow.
So I think I do have a little bit to say when it comes to Pentecostalism, and I've worked with three of the key Pentecostal denominations without identifying their names, but three main denominations, some larger, some smaller, and so on. Yeah.
So would you encourage, all Christians out there to, chase knowledge, try to understand the Bible?
Yes, I think you not engage in knowledge, and biblical knowledge for that matter, or just knowledge in general, is a disservice, not just for the individual formation and discipleship, but also for the church at large, right? Because when you think about theology, let's say, for example, it is the only discipline that we don't want to chase knowledge. So if you're going to do anthropology, the study of human beings, or, sociology, Marx and Durkheim and all that, those figures, you're going all in. But when it comes to theology, we tend to have this kind of indifference with theological interaction. So I am for logical engagement, intellectual engagement, and I believe both the Hebrew Bible, Jewish people, Israelite religion in the Hebrew Bible, And Jesus in the Greek scriptures advocated learning. And to validate that point, just think about their popular mantra, which they call the Shema. That's Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, right? Shema Israel, Yahweh Elchenu, Yahweh Echad in Hebrew. And the following verse 5 says, Deuteronomy 6:5, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and so on and so forth. Jesus quoted this actual text in Mark 12:29 and 30, but he added a word to it. He didn't just say heart, soul, strength, might, and all that stuff. He said that, but he added the word, love the Lord your God with all your mind. So there must be an ability on the part of the church to intellectually and spiritually engage with biblical texts, with ethical issues, with moral issues of life, contemporary issues. So I don't think we should divorce them one from the other.
Yeah.
They should be complement with each other. Complement with an E.
Well, as a man who's studied the Bible, done his research, I think I'm going to take you all the way back to Genesis.
Oh, wow.
So why is it that there are two different, versions of the creation story? Doesn't that make it, not really trustworthy or not valid if there are two different versions?
Okay, well, to answer the last part of your question first, does it make it trustworthy? Say, for example, you were in a court context, right? Court, you have the jurors, you have the judge, you have the witnesses, prosecution, and so on and so forth. And you have these witnesses. And everyone said exactly the same thing. I think that would be more dubious, don't you think? If everybody repeat the same word for word, that would take away the individuality of the persons, the fact that as human beings we are different in our expressions and our thoughts and so on and so forth. So the different accounts in Genesis doesn't suggest that they're inauthentic stories or narratives and so on and so forth. It might even contribute to the authenticity of the story, of the narrative, the fact that they're different accounts. And notice I didn't say different Genesis version, but rather different account of the creation. Now, there are two ways in which you can respond to that question. One of the ways is which you talk about sources. So if you're an academic, we normally take what this guy is called Julius Wellhausen, and he said there are at least 4 or so sources of Genesis. So you have the J source, and I'll explain it very quickly, or the Y source, they call it the Jehovah, the Yahweh source. They have the P source, which is the priestly source. They have the E source, which is the Elohistic source, and the D source, which is a Deuteronomistic source. So sometimes they call it JEDP. So what that means, Ugona, is that if you think that the contributors to Genesis is not just Moses, but various writers contributing to the source, the various writers are going to be explained in the creation stories slightly differently. So that's one way in which you can look at that. And how do we verify the Julius Wellhausen's idea of the source? Well, in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch or Pentateuch, if you're American or British, right? You notice in Deuteronomy, Moses, I think it's Deuteronomy, Moses died, right? And his death is recorded. So the question is, a dead man cannot record his own death. So there must be someone else or others who are included into the recording of the narratives and the sources and so on and so forth. So that's one way in which you could answer the question as to why they are not different versions, but different account of creation. The second version is you're thinking of Moses, right? If you give it Mosaic authorship, all the first 5 books of the Bible, then you're thinking of Moses. The guy is a child, found himself in the backyard of Pharaoh's daughter, grew up in an Egyptian system, which was the oldest civilization in the world at that time, right? So Moses wasn't an he wasn't an ignoramus. He wasn't an ignorant person, rather. He was an intellectual. You're being trained to write in cuneiform, which was the standard writing of Egypt at the time. You are trained under the Egyptian system, the most, you think about the pyramids, for example. You're talking about the meticulous civilization of Egypt and their learning and their arithmetic and maths and so on and so forth. And Moses is trained that way. But he's also given a Hebrew induction through his mother, who happened to be his caretaker, and so on. So right away, you can begin to appreciate these different strands feeding into Genesis. So rather than when we read it as Christians, we are seeing just this one-track linear approach, you can then look at various approaches. You and I, if we were writing about Jesus or we were writing about the creation story, we would write it the same focus, but different approaches. The journalists, they are all talking about currently Gaza and Palestine and Israel. But, if you're watching Al Jazeera, you have one particular perspective. If you're watching the BBC, you have the same story, but you're taking different perspectives for the story.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I noticed you referred to God as Yahweh. Some people out there online have said, that the Bible refers to God as Lucifer, and so the real name for God is Lucifer and not Yahweh. What's your take on that as a theologian?
That's what we would call a mistake, an etymological mistake. And by etymology, we mean the background to the root of words, the history of words, how words morphed over a period of time. Let's give an example, right? If my son came in from university and he said, "Dad, university was wicked today," I don't think he meant that the people at university were evil. I actually think that the word "wicked" is an idiom, contemporary idiom in his culture to mean it was cool, it was great. So when we think of Lucifer is not a bad word, but it's not applicable to God. Lucifer actually means son of the morning or shining one. So in that sense, one can, in an etymological sense, just simply say, God is a shining one. So what they're doing is conflating the meaning of the term shining one, and because God is light, right? Yeah. And then putting that to God. So my problem with that would be, Ugona, is that you're losing the context, because in the biblical passages and elsewhere where the term Lucifer is used, it's never apportioned to God. So you would literally have to be doing what we call a conflation of, I don't want to make it too technical, but a conflation of what we call semantic range.
Can you dumb that down for us?
Yes, I'm going to dumb it down. So when you talk about semantic range, just like I use the term wicked, it's a range in which the word wicked could be used if it's used by a young person for different things. So when you use Lucifer, you've got to think about the context. Was it ever applied to God? Was it ever applied to anyone else? And interestingly, the only being it seems to be applied to is the fallen angel, or some would argue it would be a king that was mentioned in Ezekiel, right? He's called you've cut down to the ground. I think it's Ezekiel 28. You're fallen. You're laid before the earth and the kings, and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of description of Lucifer. I think it's in Ezekiel 28. Now, to conflate that with Yahweh, or if you're in Germany, we say Yahweh, right? It's a mistake in my view. And Yahweh or Yahweh, if the V for the Germans, we call it a tetragrammaton. Tetra means four, and gramma means lettered or letters. So tetragrammaton, Jewish people did not want to call Jesus God by his name, because they felt God is utterly transcendent. He's out there, and he doesn't interact. God never interacts, as far as Jewish people at that time was concerned, with the material world. So he's always using means to interact with the world. So you will find him appearing in various forms, burning bush, pillar of fire, pillar of cloud, that kind of a thing. So he doesn't interact directly. So the Jewish people using the name of God would be seen as sacrilegious. It's disrespectful. Yeah. So they didn't even want to use the word Adonai or even the word God. Nowadays, all the time when Jewish people use the term God, they put G and then hyphen and then D, because they're showing a sense of respect. So for Gentiles or for others to simply say God or to say Yahweh, to them it's really disrespecting their tradition and their religion. So what they did with this tetragrammaton, in the Hebrew Bible, the original transliteration of it, they put 4 dots in it. 4 dots. If you go to British Museum, you will see 4 dots rather than YHWH, because they just don't want to use the name. Now, a little bit later, we have what you call, and I don't want to get too deep dive in, but a little bit later, they have what you call vowel points, because if you notice, YH, WH or VH are consonantal, right? No vowels. So what they did, they took the vowels from Adonai, like A-E-I-O-U. They took a couple of vowels, right, and inserted them between YH to make it we're able to pronounce. Okay. Because Jewish people say, no, this name should not be brought upon mortal tongue because it's unpronounceable. We should not call his name. In fact, we don't know his name. Go to a Jewish person today in any of the Jewish synagogue, and you know what they will say? They'll call him God. Hashem. Hashem. And that simply means in Hebrew, the name. So what they end up doing, oh, no, we don't want to call Yahweh. We're not even using Adonai. We might use God with the hyphen, but let's just say Hashem. And we all know as Jewish people, that means the name.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to go into our questions. So the first question is, what's your take on the books that have been removed from the Bible? Because when you read the Bible, you see some writers make reference to the book of Enoch or some other books. So what's your view on the books that have been removed from the Bible? Should we read them? Should we ignore them?
In actual fact, as an academic, I think all books should be read, whether they are, if you can read them, whether they are from a historical perspective, from a religious perspective, providing they will contribute to the type of research that you are engaging in. So I think it's first and foremost, to take the first part of your question, that what we say books have been removed from the Bible is not correct. A lot of people have made this assumption that books have been removed. It's not been removed. It depends if you are from the Roman Catholic tradition. If you're from the Roman Catholic tradition, there are some books that are added, we would say, or attached to the Old Testament that are called apocrypha. The word apocrypha means hidden or doubtful authority. And the reason why they're called hidden and doubtful authority, because Roman Catholics are over here, but Protestants are over here. When did they divide? In Martin Luther, if my memory serves me right, Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King Jr., but Martin Luther, on October the 31st, 1517 CE, or AD, as some people say, he nailed his essay papers to the cathedral door in Germany, Wittenberg, Germany, or Wittenberg, as some people say. And that started a process of discussion about what the church is, and so he led out many people from the Roman Catholic Church by his perspective, justification by faith. I don't want to go too long, but 5 solas, sola scriptura, sola fide, and so on and so forth. 5 of those, right? 5 solas. And as a result of that, you have Protestants. So the Protestants are taking a view to these particular books. And the Protestant says the books that are historical, called the Apocrypha, included by the Roman Catholics, we don't think they are inspired. And these are the reasons we don't think they are inspired. Number one, none of the apostles quoted from them. So that's one of the criteria that they say the apostles didn't use them. And if they use them, it's sparsely. Jesus didn't reference to them at all. And maybe you go to Jude, for example, the book next to Revelation, you'll find the book of Enoch, right?
Yes.
And so on. So in that sense, the next question is, well, where is the book of Enoch? And which one is the book of Enoch? So these people that are on about, their books removed, the book of Enoch, but where is it? And who authenticates it? And where was it in the church? So what I would suggest in terms of research is that each of these books, both the apocryphal books, and there's some others that I haven't mentioned, Ugona, which is called the pseudepigraphal books. So you'll have books like the Apocalypse of Adam, or the Ascension of Abraham, or the Ascension of Enoch, another Enochian, what we call Enochian tradition, where people would ascend into heaven, like Moses, buried by angels, and Enoch was ascended into heaven. He became a figure in history. In the history of the research, that's called Metatron. But let's leave that for now, right? Not Megatron, not that one, but Metatron.
My mind did go there to Megatron.
Right, but Metatron. And this is kind of an ascension. So these books, you have pseudepigraphal books, meaning a pseudepigraphal book or pseudonymous writing is a writing that would bear, for example, your name, Ugona, but you didn't write it. Right? So they stamp your name on it, but you're not the author of it. Yeah, so you have pseudepigraphal books, and then you have apocryphal books. These books are valuable for research. Why are they valuable? Even though Protestants like ourselves don't think they're inspired like our counterpart, the Roman Catholics, they are important because many of them were written between the Hebrew Bible, the close of it, and the beginning of the Greek scriptures. So the Old Testament, the New Testament. That period there is called the intertestamental period, or the Second Temple period primarily. During that period, all of these books are coming up, right? A lot of these books, and others before that, of course, as well. And they are telling you about the history from a non-religious perspective
of people who are in religion, right? So people can write about the church, but they're not necessarily Christians, right? Yeah. So that's what they are actually doing. So the books, in a succinct and simplified way, we don't as Protestants see them as inspired, as canonized. The word canon means rule. We exclude them as rule against them as inspired by God for the reasons I gave. Jesus didn't use them. The apostles doesn't seem to use them. They're very sparsely referenced in the New Testament and so on and so forth. And so on that basis, why include them with the other 66? Roman Catholic says, no, but these are valuable books. We have a few people, church fathers maybe mention them or others maybe mention. So let's keep them in. So the question about whether they are inspired is a big issue between faith traditions.
But have you read them?
I've read numerous bits of them I had to read them in my research of Second Temple literature.
And they never made you question your faith?
Yes, they do. And that is another issue. You've actually raised the issue for me in terms, not question my faith, but there are some issues in them that are contradictory to the other new books by the rest of the Bible. So that's part of why they canonized. They said, no, well, this doesn't agree with this here because you need synchrony, right? So if you're going to have a book that is claiming inspiration, right, you put it this way, Ugona, you and I, we can't be right if we can't both be right if we're contradictory, right? No. One of us has got to be right and one wrong, or both of us are wrong. You see, so it's on that basis they have what you call a canon, which is a rule of the church, and that determines, along with church tradition, that determines what books are included in our text and what books are excluded from the text. And I think the church has that right, don't you? Think about it. Whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. And that's not talking about demons, by the way. In the Pentecostal church, we say that. That's talking about the authority of the church, right, to make rules with regards to the church. I hope that makes sense. Long-winded, but
you
hope
have
it makes
taken
sense.
me into another question, actually.
Yeah.
So you talked about contradictory, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at the Old Testament, when I recently went back to read the Old Testament, the way I saw God there was quite different from how I saw him in the New Testament. The God of the Old Testament, let all the people die in, the wilderness, because they questioned Moses and all those kind of things. Yeah. And the God of the Old Testament seemed very more hard-handed than the God of the New Testament. So does that then contradict the statement that God does not change?
Well, immutability is the idea that God doesn't change, right? When we say God doesn't change, we mean God doesn't change in his essential nature. In terms of his being, you don't change in terms of being a human being, but your features or my features or behaviors may change. But in terms of who we are essentially, for example, our hands are where they're supposed to be, and so those type of things. So when we say God doesn't change, we mean he doesn't change, and notice, in terms of his essential nature. The thing that makes God God doesn't change, but his expressions, how he relates to human beings, that can change. Two ways in which God relates to us, and I'll respond to the other aspect of your question. God responds to us unconditionally. Which means you don't have to do a thing for him to say, bless you with A or bless you with B. It's not based on you. Abraham, in Genesis 12, I will bless your seed. No matter what you do, I will bless your seed because it's up on me, right? It's on me from a sovereign point of view. But they're conditional covenantal relationships where God says, if you do A, then I will do B. But if you don't do A, I will not do B. So that is conditional. Now put that in the context of suffering, which is your question. God allows genocide. He allows babies to be killed, animals to be killed. And that's the difficult questions for theologians and philosophers alike. Why would a good God allow evil in the world and suffering? And so Christians over the years have created what we call a theodicy, right? Theodicies are ways in which, or theories in which, that we construct in order to respond to those that are non-believers and even believers, to explain to them why God allows suffering or why he allows evil. Now, first and foremost, Ugona, I need to say this for the audience as well. The questions sometimes presume that God thinks like us. And so if you start
true,
with
actually.
that premise that God thinks like us and he must be brought down to our standard, so he must fit into this logical box.
Our framework, yeah.
Yeah, then it means that you're never going to be satisfied because there are always things that God is going to do that is going to be contradictory to the human experience existentially, right? So that's the first problem. But when we think about a theodicy, God allows man the ability to choose. Now, ask the very person who's saying, why does God allow genocide? And ask them, how would you feel? And it's a kind of facetious question, but how would you feel if you had no ability to choose who you are, or you have no ability to choose what you do? So the fact that you have choice itself is a gift, and a gift in which you are able to choose right or wrong. Now, the guys who flew the planes in the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001, God is in control. God could stop them. Yes, he could, but he has given man the responsibility in the earth to make choices. That wasn't God flying the planes in the Twin Towers, right? It was the choices of men, or by the way, psychopathic men, if you want to put it like that, and so on. So one would say that it's a difficult question, and I don't think on this level of what we call terrestrial experience, earthly experience, we or anyone else are ever going to answer that question fully. And the reason why we cannot do that, for my very first response to you, because we cannot assume that God acts and thinks in the same way that we act and think. And it's actually, from my perspective, it's a kind of a presumption that we have, that, well, if God doesn't explain this to me exactly as I want it to be explained, then he must not be God. Well, what if you apply that same methodology to everything else? Well, if I don't understand physics, then physics must not be true. It doesn't seem to gel very well. So the answer to the question is, in many of the writers of the Bible, they're not necessarily saying God sanctions these behaviors. They're writing about the behaviors that people engage in. Now, there are some stories where God says, wipe out the whole tribe, or
including women,
children.
babies.
Now, is that right in the modern context of genocide in a natural sense? No, it would be despicable. But we are not God, and that is my point at the beginning. So, as difficult it is for us to conceptualize that God would ask people to kill another person, well, not in the modern sense, but in the ancient Near East, that was practiced, even if you were not a religious person. So, the next thing I wanted to quickly say, Ugona, and then I'll maybe this will lead into another question, is it's interesting, don't you find it? Even those who are atheists or new atheists, Richard Dawkins, late Christopher Hitchens, and others, it's interesting that they would blame God for the evil things in the world, but they'll never give him the credit for anything good. Once it's something good, it becomes humanistic. It's us that we are the humans that accomplish this task. We make planes fly.
Once it's something bad,
but once it's something bad, he gets the blame. But anything that is celebratory or good, no, it can't be God. So there's an inconsistency in the conversation, I would say. But theodicies, there are lots of materials out there for both the unchurched and Christians alike that they can pursue in terms of research into the nature of God. I would encourage everyone. I'm trying to remember his name. John Lennox, I think it is. John Lennox is a popular guy, and he has debated most of the popular atheists and on the matter of theodicy. Really very good arguments on YouTube. So save us the time. You could really just click on and check out and Lennox and do a bit of research. Yes.
So you actually brought me to another question. So God permitted the killing in Old Testament, but then why does the Bible then say thou shalt not kill? Doesn't that contradict?
Yes, and that's a popular one, and that it's not a contradiction because the old King James Version, 1611 version, sometimes uses archaic words. So the word there, thou shalt not kill, if you take a modern translation, it's saying you shouldn't engage in premeditated murder. That's what it's saying. It's not saying, if someone attacked you, you should just lay down and say, the Lord will protect me, right? What if we do that as a country? I mean, what if we are attacked? The people who are saying we should just turn the other cheek, which is a misunderstanding of that text, by the way.
Yeah, I'll need you to explain that after too.
Yeah, but you know, when you if we should just turn the other cheek, and that's what it means. Well, if we're as British people, for example, if we're attacked by Iran or China or Russia or whoever, let's just let the Lord deals with it, or let's take it closer to home. I don't think, Ugona, if you came to my home and you broke into my home with the intention to kill everybody in my home, I'm just going to be clasping my hands and saying, oh, Lord Jesus, just get rid of these. I might do that after I break your hand. but there it is. And that's the issue. So the text is actually saying, when you look at the text, you should not murder. Don't engage premeditated murder. And Jewish laws, as well as ancient Near Eastern laws, some of which is based upon a code that is called the Code of Hammurabi, right, code. Some of these laws, what they are doing, even when you kill somebody by premeditated murder, right, if you, like in the Bible, you got to a city of refuge on time, if you got to this geographical location on time, you might be pardoned. That is if you can run as fast as Usain Bolt, that is. But there are rules that govern, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And then we could take that to capital punishment and its legitimacy and just so many other ethical issues surrounding that. But the text is simply saying, don't murder. Don't engage premeditated murder. It's not saying you shouldn't go to war or you shouldn't defend yourself or defend your... No, you should have... Self-defense is absolutely important in scriptures, right? And when the text says... Can I lead into your next question? When the text says you should turn the other cheek. If you notice, it's I hope I can explain this clearly. If the text is... If a person slaps you on the right cheek, then give them the left. Now, think about how I'm going to slap you on the right cheek, right? We're facing each other. If I slap you on the right, I can't slap you on the right cheek.
You're not
going
to use a physical example, are you?
I'm not. No, I know. I can see a hand coming over the other side, right? But notice, if I'm going to slap you on the right cheek, I've got to use the back of my hand. Yeah. So it's not, the text is not saying that you should engage in rage, and if somebody engage in rage and slap you, the person who's doing the slapping, the idiom and the context, the idiomatic expression is a person who's offering correction, and they're doing it gently, because when a person wants to knock you out, if I'm gonna slap you on the other side of the cheek, but in this instance I'm slapping you on the right? My right is here, isn't it? So your right is over the other side. So if I'm going to slap you, it's more likely the back of my hand. Yeah. So it's not a real slap. In other words, the type of slap is, I am correcting you, but I'm doing it out of love. I'm giving you guidance, and I'm doing this as a friend. It's not saying, just go put your face out there and let anybody slap you. Now, Ogona, I'm a small guy, right? It's one thing for another small guy to slap me the first time. Now, I might survive the first slap, but if a big guy let me tell you, if he slaps you the first time, you're not going to have any other cheeks left for him to slap you the second time. No. So you see, we're kind of misreading how the text is to be understood.
So you're saying what it means is, if someone corrects you the first time, you should open yourself
because the person who is giving you the correction is a friend. It's a slap not from an enemy, but a slap from a friend. If someone, if the person slaps you on the right cheek, give them the left. I mean, who is going to give your enemy your left side? Nobody is going to do it. So you've got to understand the cultural context of why these examples and analogous examples are used. You can't simply read the Western theology. Like that. You can't read the Western theological mindset in an ancient Near Eastern book or Middle Eastern book. And that's one of the mistakes we constantly do. We think everybody in the Bible must be British or they must be American. No, they weren't, right? Bible is written on 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe, but also written in 3 languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, translated in Latin. And so we can't read. I once say to friends of mine, what would you do if you found out Jesus was engaged in the Lord's Supper from an African perspective? I just want you to think about that, or from an Asian perspective, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, it does change my view when it comes to the word, violence. Because I was in a church once, and we were talking about, Christians being killed in Nigeria. Yeah. And so we were discussing, would the person fight back or not? Yeah. And then they were saying they would pray. And I was like, how would you pray if someone comes into your house with a machete? How are you going to sit there and pray?
Yeah.
And the reason I was saying that is because we once had a neighbor, someone living on our street, like in Nigeria, who was a priest. And, armed robbers came in with guns and stuff, but he was pouring holy water on them.
Wow.
Obviously, he passed away.
Yeah.
So, because many people have this view that Christians should not be violent. Christians should not fight back.
Yeah. But fighting back, Ugona, is not being violent. Fighting back is self-defense. Now, let me ask you this, or let me just say it this way. Most of those persons who make that conclusion, they are not leaders of congregations or countries. If you are the prime minister and you're a Christian, you're not going to fight back, right? But you're just going to let people come in, murder, kill, loot, pillage, and do all these things in your country. That is a greater moral evil than actually defending yourself, right? So it's the less of two evils if you take what we call in ethics a consequentialist argument, right? Or utilitarian argument. It's the less of two evils. So either you attack the person who attempt to attack you, right? Or preemptively, or you sit back and let them attack you and wipe out whoever those of you are, right? And so on. So the issue here is not going to advocate violence. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying go kill people. We should live as best as possible peaceably with all the human beings,
what the Bible says,
right? But in the same light, in the act of self-defense, you've got to defend yourself, your family, your country, and Jesus would affirm you defending yourself. In fact, the lack of self-defense in that sense would be more ethically problematic. Let's use a story, and then that will lead to your next question, I should say. Right? Now, remember the man that fell among thieves, the Samaritan, that served the Good Samaritan? The guy who fell. So he's going down the Jericho road, right? And Jericho is kind of a winding, if those who've been there, it's kind of a road that you move from the top, a sea level, and you're going all the way down. So this guy is at the side of the road. And guess who are the two persons who walked on the other side? Number one, it's a Levite. You know who the Levites were? Remember with Moses in Exodus? Who is on the Lord's side? These are the guys who were selected by God to bear and attend to the tabernacle and the temple, the priesthood. Because when the Aaronic priesthood was problematic with Aaron and the calf of gold, when Moses came down, they were worshiping. And so, okay, let the Levites deal with that. Then the text says the priest and the Levites stood on the other side. Now, we can understand why they stood on the other side to a degree. Because priests, maybe they thought the man was dead, right? And priests don't interact with deceased and so on. So that's one reason. But the other side to that is when you have the priesthood and the Levitical priesthood and the Aaronic priesthood, those who understand the church, let's put it into contemporary context, the church pastors, when we are walking on the other side, when someone is harmed, the Samaritan in the story, which is depicted as a good Samaritan, something which is problematic because Samaritans were not looked upon as truly genuine Jews, right? Yeah. But this Samaritan is genuinely labeled and should be so. The good Samaritan, they poured in the oil and the wine. Notice the two elements, oil and wine. What do they represent? Study the entire Hebrew Bible. Oil and wine, even at the marriage of Cana of Galilee, water turned to wine. These are a very important emblem in Judaism and Israelite religion. The point I'm making is to stand aside while other people are harmed, whether in a social justice context or in a war context. Jesus is saying, that's problematic for me. So that's what I would say in response to that. Yeah.
You've just led me into another question. What's your view when it comes to tithing?
Wow. Now, tithing is a very problematic question. And the reason why we say that, because there are those, I'm going to give you both of these. So there are those who are against tithing. And the reason why they're against tithing, they think tithing is based upon crops and it's an agricultural tithe, right?
Yes,
and tithing should be with specificity to the Levites. So it's because the Levites gave themselves, which we mentioned earlier, they gave themselves over to the temple. These guys must have some pension when they get old. I'm trying to put it in modern language. They must be able to take care of their family. How are they going to do that if they're not engaging in work? And so tithing, the rest of the Israelites, give these guys money. Now, when we come to Malachi, you can see that being played out, the popular text, you're cursed with a curse, and, bring me all the tithes into storehouse and that there may be meat in my house and all that stuff. Now, so what they say, because tithing was a part of the temple, the entire Jewish temple, and the temple was destroyed in 70 AD by Titus the Great, right? Then with the temple goes the tithing. So that's what they say. So there's tithing is not relevant for those people. Right, for us today, because the temple is gone. Now, for those who are on the tithing side for us today, would argue something like this. Well, you would notice not only tithing was agricultural, so was offerings. So if we're going to get rid of tithing, we need to get rid of offering. So if tithing can be if offering can be morphed into monetary giving, why not tithing also into monetary giving? So you have these arguments back and forth. And no matter what I say today, Ugonna, you're going to have two groups of people. One say, no tithing. The other say a tithing. What I found, though, there's a re-articulation of those who believe in tithing today. They're saying, yes, we believe in tithing, but we don't carry over the curse because of the New Testament passages on grace and so on. So we don't say you are cursed with a curse, as Malachi 3:10 and other verses say, but what we say is you're honoring God with your substance and so on. There are other passages which seems to suggest that even though tithing is not explicitly taught per se in the New Testament, but it seems to indirectly suggest there's some sense of tithing, right? The question was asked to, I think it's scribes and Pharisees. Jesus said, you tithe in mints and anise and all these types of, different things, agricultural things as well. But you have neglected the weightier part or the weightier responsibility. So what it appears Jesus was saying, he said, you should be doing the tithing, but you shouldn't leave the others undone. Do this, but don't leave. So you're going to get the for and again. And if we pursue the tithing discussion, I'm trying to remember a guy, can't remember his name, but he's written a complete dissertation on tithing. His entire, in fact, book is on tithing. And if you permit me, I will forward that to you. I'll find it and forward it to you for others to read as well. Right? Hope it makes some sense.
So do you tithe then?
Yes, our church. We still teach tithing, but we don't make it judgmental. We say to the folks, when you give, this is an emblem of your sacrifice to God, and we feel that tithing is beneficial for a New Testament church simply because we do have offerings financially. And I feel if I'm going to be consistent in my hermeneutics, I can't simply say tithing is done away with because it's agricultural and then not do the same to offerings, right? And the New Testament teach offerings, even though it hasn't mentioned tithe with specificity. So, that's our take on it. I mean, they can always come back on me and say, no, but that's fine.
So my next question, the Bible says that women shouldn't preach.
Wow.
What's your view on that?
Well, you happen to have a person before you who was taught by one of Britain's very influential feminist theologian. Doesn't mean I am a feminist. Her name is she's Professor Tina Beattie, and she taught at Roehampton University many years ago when I did my undergrad studies then. And that doesn't mean I have to become a feminist because she was. But I think she gave us some very good grounding, logical arguments of feminist approaches. And by feminism, for our viewers, by feminism, we don't mean the radical feminists those who are attempting to replace men. And that's not what we mean. What we're saying is that there are various approaches to the Bible that should seek to elevate women to an equal status, at least by nature, to that of men. We're functional. We're ontologically the same, and by ontologically we mean we are the same. We're human being, but we're functionally different. I've always said I would never want to be in a labor ward giving birth. Absolutely not. Sometimes you visit the not postnatal, but the labor wards, and you wonder, is it the man giving birth or is it the woman? But so I wouldn't want to do that because functionally, even though I'm a human being like the lady laying there, we are functionally different and so on. And so just to reiterate the question, you asked the question, I kind of slightly missed that bit by mentioning that.
It said, Paul said in the Bible
that
women shouldn't preach.
I remember.
So
thank you very kindly for that. Actually, there, again, like the tithing question, there are points for and against. I am for women preaching, pastoring, leading, even though I think it will have some bearing on women with their responsibilities as well. But I'm for women in that context. And the reason why I'm for women, I think there's a misunderstanding of the text in 1 Timothy 2 and verse 12, which is the key text. So we say in church 1 Timothy 2 and verse 12. But 1 Timothy 2:12 says, suffer not a woman to let a woman learn in silence. I suffer not a woman to teach or to teach or to usurp authority over a man. Just she should learn in silence. Now, the Greek word that is used there for authority is what we would call ugona in the biblical studies. We would call it a hapax legomenon, and I'll explain it.
That's a really big word.
Hapax legomenon means this is a word that only occurs once in the entire New Testament, or in the entire book, or in the entire letter, right? So the hapax legomenon is the word authority. And the word for authority there, two ways to pronounce it. It's authenteo or autheneteo, right? The word for authority. Now think about it this way. In that very chapter in 1 Timothy 2, Paul uses two other words for authority. So he had many other words to use for authority, right? Exousia, right? Dunamis, for example, word for power also can mean authority. Exousia, the word for authority as well. So why use authenteo here and only use it once in the entire New Testament? Or in the entire, say, letter to Timothy, right? The question is, whatever was going on in Timothy's church, and by the way, Timothy's church was at Ephesus. A lot of people are not aware of that. So if you read 1 Timothy chapter 1, you notice there's some problems going on at Ephesus. Who was Timothy? Those are the questions we should ask. Timothy's father, think about it. Was he Jewish? No, I think he was Greek and his mother was Jewish, right? So you can already see the problem. If you're in a church and you're supposedly Jewish church, let's say it was a Jewish church, right? And your pastor, right, his parents are half Jewish and half Gentile. You're already having some critique as to whether this guy is truly Jewish, right? And stuff. So those are some of the things that were going on in Timothy's church. There's an issue with authority. There's also an issue with men usurping authority over other men as well. We know that because there are two men mentioned, Hymenaeus and Alexander, or Philetus, Hymenaeus and Alexander in chapter 1. So here we come to chapter 2, right? What the writer is saying, in Timothy's church at Ephesus, the background is there is a woman's lib movement. I'm making it popular. Woman's lib movement because Ephesus, was at the center of we had a temple to Artemis, Artemis, or the goddess Diana. And in this temple you have male priests and female priestesses. Now, what was happening here, it's believed by a lot of the scholars that when the women would become converted at Ephesus, because they had authority as priestesses, in the cult of Diana or Artemis, they think they could come into the church and then wield the same authority. So it wasn't a text that was making a rule for all women at all time. It was saying these women, and I'm going to suggest to you, maybe a particular ringleader, one woman who was stirring up the strife. And I know that because when you read 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 12, he started talking about women should learn in before he said women learn in silence, he said, I'm asking men to pray everywhere, lifting holy hands without wrath and doubting, right? Then he said the women should dress with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with gold pearls, costly, and so on and so forth, and so on. Then he said women, right? But when he comes to verse 12, he says, I suffer not a woman. Now that term, a woman, could be all the women under one umbrella, or it could just mean that one particular woman who is causing the trouble. I don't want her to operate in the position of an eldership. So it's not the idea of simply no woman can be a pastor, no woman can be a leader, but if you're going to usurp authority, and you know what that word means? Usurp authority, seizing authority by force. So whatever that woman or the women were doing, they were kind of creating a coup d'etat, right, to overthrow Timothy and the eldership. And Paul says, listen, sort this out, and so that is not an indictment, an anathema if a woman becomes a pastor and so on and so forth. Because if we're going to do that, might as well we go through other places of the Bible. Romans 16 listed about 13 women in Paul's as supporter to Paul. One of them is called Janiah. Some people change the name to Janias to make it masculine, but Janiah. And then there's just and not only that, you have Phoebe, right? Or Phoebe, as we say. You know who Phoebe is? She was a deacon, a servant, right? Most people say the word servant there is just simply just serving each other and all that stuff. No, the word there is the equivalent term that was used in the next chapter, in 1 Timothy 3. Remember, if a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. When you read verse 7 and 8 in 1 Timothy 3, a deacon must be blameless. Similar responsibilities like a bishop, right? But the word deacon there is diakonos in Greek. When you go over to Romans 16 of Phoebe, the word servant is the feminine form of diakonos. Wow. Nothing else changes. So whatever the responsibilities are for the masculine deacon, it's the same for the feminine or deaconess, as we call them.
I've never actually had anyone explain that to me properly, because I'm always wondering, women should not preach, women should not preach. And then when I see women preach, I'm like, are they sinning? Are they, what's going on?
The key element, the key element to the text is not just the authority and and by the way, the text didn't say the woman shouldn't preach. The word that is used there is teaching.
Teaching, okay.
Not preaching, even though they use that text to say she can't preach, but it's teaching there. There's something else I wanted to point out when it comes to women speaking. The text is not talking about all women in all generation, in all time period. What it's talking about is the usurpation of authority. You can be a woman who is a pastor, but you're functioning under the authority of your eldership, the church board or executive team or whatever. Once you're functioning under authority, respectfully, even as part of the eldership, you can lead, you can pastor, you can do, because you're not usurping authority. Now, Ogona, here is the challenge. Who is it in terms of gender that causes most breakaways in churches? Do you think it's the women? No, it's not. So it appears to me that men can also usurp authority over other men in the church. So we've got to balance the text when we read them, exegetically, that is.
So speaking of church, according to the Bible, the Sabbath is on a Saturday, isn't it?
Indeed, yes.
So doesn't that mean that those of us who go to church on a Sunday are actually,
contravening the rule?
Yes, are breaking the rule.
No,
as the Bible
not.
Also says, if you break one of the commandments, you've broken all.
And by the way, that text, let me just, for those who are maybe on the Adventist side, Seventh-day Adventist side or stuff like that, nothing is wrong with keeping a Saturday or keeping a Sunday or keeping any day for that matter. The Bible says in Romans 14 and 15, if one man keeps a day, whether it's a Sabbath day, and another man doesn't keep the day, they both do it as unto the Lord. First, yes, you didn't know that it's in the Bible, right?
No.
So if you look at Romans 14 and Romans 15, it says, every man who esteems a day esteems it unto the Lord. If you don't esteem the day, you still do not esteem it unto the Lord. So any way you take it, the person is doing it as unto the Lord. I can see your face. I did not know that was in the Bible. Yes, it's there. And for my listeners, if they will just check on for textual reference, Romans 14 and 15, where Paul says, if you keep a day holy, you do it as unto the Lord.
Let me just get that out, just in case. If you bring it out.
Shall I bring it up for
yes,
you
please.
So everyone can see that, right?
So you said
Romans 14 and 15. There are two passages that talks about that. Let me just find one. I think it's in Romans 14, the first one.
Okay,
Romans 14:5. There
okay.
we go. We both got it. Romans 14.
14:5.
Yeah, so I was correct. So let's go back to, you know where I was? I was actually in Romans 4. Wasn't in Romans 14.
One person regards
shall I read it? Shall I read the whole thing? So, not the whole thing, but a bit of it. Him that is weak in the faith, receive he. And this is from the KJV, right? But not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth, right? For God hath received them, him, or both of them for that matter. Who are you that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth, right? Yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. One man esteem one day above another, another esteem every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. And here's verse 6. He that regarded the day, the Sabbath day, or any other day, right, regarded it unto the Lord. And he that regarded it not the day, to the Lord he doth not regard it. So it's not something that you are sinning if you don't keep this day or you don't keep that day. Because in the New Testament, the day is not the focus. The Sabbath rest is no longer a physical rest, even though you need physical rest. The Sabbath rest is resting in the fact of your salvation, that I am now saved. Christ in us, the hope of glory, right? So we could do the Sabbath, but I would have to do a whole session by itself on the Sabbath.
So you're saying it doesn't matter if you go on a church on a Saturday or a Sunday?
It does not matter.
As long as you keep one day.
As long, and no, not as long as you keep one day. What I'm saying is if you go to church all 7 days and a person went to church one day, that day could be a Saturday or a Wednesday, to God, this text, based on the text, it doesn't matter. And that's the issue. But of course, if you're going to, and I don't want to be unfair, if you are going to do the Sabbath, you used the term earlier when you asked the question, or in your statement, if you break one of the law, you've broken all. Now, you know what Jesus was saying there? How many commandments you think, Ugona, are there in the entire Hebrew system of laws? How many commandments you think are there?
Must be more than 600 and something. 613.
Yeah. So when Jesus said if you break one, he's not talking about the Decalogue, which is Exodus 20, the 10
Commandments. Did I just get that number when I said 600?
It's over 600. 613.
Wow. Oh, wow.
And they're generally called mitzvah. Mitzvah is commandment. So a girl who is 12, she perform bat mitzvah. She's the daughter of the commandment. A boy who is a boy who's at 13, he performs bar mitzvah. He's a son of the commandment, right? Reading the Torah and so on. So there's 613 commandments. 365 are called negative, because they start with thou shalt not, and 248 are positive because they start with thou shalt. So when Jesus said, and this is an interesting thing, those who are saying you break one law, when Jesus said if you broke one of these, he's not talking about one of the 10. He's talking about one of all the 613, because he's making it difficult to describe for the scribes and Pharisees.
If you've broken one,
you've broken one.
And they've definitely broken one.
And they've definitely, if they might not break the Sabbath one, but they certainly have broken other ones. So he's saying to you, you're literally hypocritical, because you're here talking about, not wanting to take the animal out of the hole on the Sabbath day and doing all that stuff. But how many of the other commandments of the 613 have you broken?
Wow.
So he's making it uniquely difficult for them. And Jesus, like that, he's very confrontational in a subtle way. You know those people who can, God forbid, but those people can insult you and you don't even know that you're being insulted. Jesus has a way of telling the Pharisees, giving them the message without shouting or without being overtly, obnoxious or rude or anything like that. You know what I mean? So the Sabbath day, it's fine to keep the Sabbath day. It's fine to keep Saturday. It's fine to keep Sunday. And there's this argument that the Pope Constantine, after the Council of Nicaea 325 CE, changed the Sabbath. No, he did not change the Sabbath, right? No, he did not.
Oh, wow.
What they did here, Ugona, and I'll stop again, but what they did here is they blame a lot of things on Pope Constantine I that he didn't do.
They said he moved it to a Sunday,
no, he did
making
not
us worship the sun god on a Sunday.
No, he didn't. And here's why he didn't. And I'm passionate, you can see, passionate about it. What was happening, it's like the story of Easter, right? The Jewish people have Pesach, right? Pesach, right? That's a Jewish celebration of Passover. And the Christians had a celebration for resurrection. So they call it Pascha. So Jesus called the Paschal Lamb, right? So both of them were celebrating. So you have the Jewish people. They were celebrating Pesach. And the Christians were celebrating Pascha around the same time as what we call Passover. Both mean Passover, by the way. But Jews celebrate Jewish Passover differently from Christians celebrating Christian Pascha. How do we know that? Look at 1 Corinthians chapter number 11 verses 17 to 34. Paul talking about the communion, right? When Jewish people, and I'm going to come back to the question in the Sabbath, but when Jewish people celebrate the Passover, they have a seder plate, S-E-D-E-R, seder plate. And on the plate, there's about 5 or 7 different things to eat on that plate. Bitter herbs, eggs, a shank bone, various different things. When Christians celebrate the Pascha, we do not do that. We only take 2 things, bread and wine. So we're not doing exactly the same thing. We're celebrating resurrection right, of Jesus Christ, Jewish people are celebrating deliverance from the bondage in Egypt. They're celebrating the Exodus. So one is the old Exodus. For us, it's the new Exodus.
You're really my mind, because
but let me answer your question, and then let me answer the question on the Sabbath continuously. So when we think about the Sabbath being changed by Constantine, no, he didn't. Constantine oversaw, right, as the emperor of the Roman Empire at the time, from 313 to 325, he got a victory because he saw the sign of a cross in the sky, right? I think our children went to, of course, Sacred Heart School in Camberwell, right? And let the cat out of the bag. But they have a motto there, Latin motto. I think it's in hoc signo vinces, or ad hoc in hoc signo vinces. In this sign we will conquer. So Constantine in 313, he's battling against can't remember. I think it's Licinius, the guy is called, at a place called the Milvian Bridge, and he saw the sign and he put signs on the shields of the soldiers, and they won. Constantine became interested in Christianity. He's the emperor, so he called all the factions of the Christians, the Arians, the Athanasians, the various factions. Let's settle these doctrinal problems you have, because I want unity in my empire. And that's what he did. He's trying to unite the Jews between their Sabbath and Christian worship of the resurrection, which they did on the first day during the Roman Empire. So what has happened? This argument between Jews and Christians is an ongoing issue. We call it in the literature, by the way, so you can read works from James D.G. Dunn, Professor Daniel Boyarin. We call it the parting of the ways between Judaism and Christianity. Parting of the ways, because we were trying to maintain peace. Constantine was trying to do that. Constantine the First. So I've been talking a while, right? So the issue here is, it's not a matter of Saturday and Sunday. It's a matter of, we're going to separate Sunday for Christians and let the Jewish people have their Saturdays that they normally have for peace sake. Wow. Away from that, this idea that Constantine changed, and there are even some false literature on the internet. Listen, the worst people to interact with is those who are Google scholars. You know, I'm not talking about Google scholars that gives you proper references. I'm talking about people who think that they know more than researchers.
They just watch anything on YouTube and then pick it up.
Yeah, and they think, I'm a good researcher.
There's so many things on YouTube, even from what you said now, because I watched the video on YouTube, right? Yes. And then this guy was saying that, the Roman Catholic Church, they are actually the beast in the Bible, because, Emperor Constantine, he made everyone start worshipping, the sun god on a Sunday. No. Even that,
Can I respond to that very quickly before you finish, right? Because it's an important point. The Amun-Ra, right, is an Egyptian god of a sun. It's the sun disk, right? And Amun-Ra existed long before in Moses' time. In fact, I think it's during the time of what we call the pharaoh. Pharaoh, I think it's Akhenaten and another, or Tutankhamun. You'd have heard of those. Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, right? And so the idea of Amun-Ra, right, the sun god, this Egyptian pharaoh, whatever, saw the sun, and he displaced all the other gods, or placed them secondary to the sun disk. So they would worship the sun as the main god, the one god. That's kind of some people would argue, the birth of a type of monotheism, right? And so on. But Amun-Ra, the sun god, is not something that Constantine. They are doing what we call anachronism. They're putting wrong things in the wrong time period, right? Constantine, he's been blamed. Listen, if you go on YouTube, if you go on the internet, everybody blames Constantine and 325. Everything happens there, and that's not true. Right? 325 CE or AD was one of the council, and the purpose of that council was not to settle Saturday and Sunday. It was not to to have all these discussions. It's really to talk about Arianism, right? And Arianism in comparison to a view that was held by Athanasius, a guy called Athanasius. So you have Arius and Athanasius. That's the main thing. Then you have other council like 381, the Nicaea Constantinopolitan Council, the 451 Council of Chalcedon, and we go on and on. Actually, Roman Catholics has 22 councils, 21. Wow. And we say 7 main councils, ecumenical. Right, I've been at it.
Wow, I know we don't have much time, but there's so many questions I need to ask you. Okay, my next question is, how do you know that Jesus is actually the only way to God?
Okay, that question is asked, and when I say asked, not by you personally, but asked by a group of people that is coming out of, and my book mentions this as well, the History of Religions School. And the History of Religion School says, Ugona, all religions are equal. Right?
Yeah, that's what they say.
So when you start with that premise that all religions are equal, you're going to see Christianity as just one of the religions among the others, right? So in that sense, if you take that approach, you're going to say God can be known through various ways. And they give an analogy of an elephant. So if you blindfold a man and you ask him, or 100 men, or 20 men rather than 120 men, you blindfold them all and you ask each of them to touch the elephant. They will touch the elephant in different places.
Yeah.
So they're saying the elephant is like God, and each of us come to God in different ways, right? Now, the Christian worldview, and notice how I'm phrasing that. In the Christian worldview, the only way to come to God is through Jesus Christ. That's the Christian worldview. And you find that biblically, internally in our text. Jesus says it in John 14:6. Sorry, I need to have a sip of mine as well for refresh my mouth. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So in the Christian worldview, we say, no, you're not going to become a Christian by becoming a Buddhist or following the Eightfold Path or trying to or be a Hindu worshipping 330 million gods or Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahman and all that stuff. We say, no, you have to come through the person and the work of Jesus Christ to be saved. So, so that's our view. And it's always going to be in conflict, right, with other world religions.
What about those who say that God and Allah are the same?
In a sense, one could argue that God and Allah is the same if you're looking at the meaning of words. Because if you go to Arabic Christians in Arabia, they call God Allah. So Allah is not a bad word. It's just because of his association with Islam, we think that Allah is a different God. And some Christians, I would say, they incorrectly say that Muslims worship a different God just on the basis of the word. I don't say that. I would say Muslims worship a different God, or Hindus worship a different God from Christians and Jews for the sole purpose of how they describe the God. So, for example, if your God is limited and the Christian God is unlimited, we can't be worshiping the same God. If your God has never incarnated himself and become a human being, and our God has, how could we be worshiping the same God? So, in that sense, I would argue that we are not. But based on the word, no, you can't just, excuse me, you can't just simply say that we are worshiping the same God. It's not an easy case. Based on the word, let me back up on that. Based on the word, you could say Allah and Elohim or Yahweh is the same. Or Elohim and Allah is the same based on the word. But based on the character of the God, we are not worshiping the same God. So it's on the character that I argue as opposed to just words. People can use words and equivocate on them. God can mean one thing in this sense and God can mean something else in another sense. Yeah.
So what about those who say that we shouldn't be celebrating Easter and Christmas because they are pagan festivals? Yeah. Easter is worshipping, some goddess.
Winter solstice. And so. Yeah, I've written an article on it and I'm quite happy to maybe tag this under your video or whatever. And actually it's available on Facebook as well. And the article is actually, it's called a critical introduction to in defense of Easter. And what I did, I defended why Easter is biblical. I pointed out with evidence. The reason why people are saying Easter is paganistic, it's because of a man by the name of Saint Venerable Bede, B-E-D-E. Before Saint Venerable Bede, who claimed to be an historian, and all historians says he was not a historian, right? Before him, no one saw Easter or the Christian Pascha as paganistic. Nobody. Think about it. Even in the early church documents and the article that I wrote, actually it's also available on an academic website called Academia Edu. So academia.edu, right? And I've published it there. So you just need to make an account and then you can access millions, by the way. And that's not a hyperbole or an exaggeration, millions of articles on there. And so I pointed out why Easter, and we might not call it Easter, but we may say the Christian Pascha was always celebrated from the earliest church or the early church in Christianity, right? Always celebrated. The problem was never celebration of Easter. The problem was not making it coincide with Jewish Passover. That was the problem. Now, can you imagine if Christians then thought Easter was pagan and they were indifferent to paganism? Why would they be celebrating something that they were indifferent to? But they celebrated Easter. They celebrated the Christian Pascha. So I would say, and I've got in the article, I've got actually primary sources. And this is what you ask them, Ugona. Those of you that are saying that Easter is pagan, and I'll do Christmas in a minute, Easter is pagan, provide for me one single piece of primary source. I'm not talking about what you read on the internet from Joe Blogs and all that stuff. I want you to go back as close to the time as possible in the let's go to Pope Constantine the first, 325 CE. Find me one piece of evidence that proves that Easter is pagan. I have been asking that question for years. And not a single person can provide. I'm talking about those who say Easter is pagan. Find one piece of evidence where one Christian or anyone else during that time period, not later in the 21st century, during this time period in the 4th and 5th century, where people say Easter is pagan. No, because everybody celebrated the Christian Pascha.
But why is the word Easter not in the Bible then?
No, Easter is a mistranslation used once in the Bible. I think it's in Acts 14. I can't remember where it is. But it's used once, but the word should be Passover. Now, the problem is some people argue, well, you see, Christians should celebrate the Passover, right? But so how we're not celebrating the Jewish Passover? We have explained that before. We're not celebrating the Jewish Passover because of the differences between Jewish Passover, the Seder plate, and the Christian Pascha. The Jewish Pesach and the Christian Pascha. So it's two different things. Even Jewish people will tell you, we don't celebrate the resurrection, but we still do Passover. Because they don't believe still that Jesus is Messiah. He's not Yeshua HaMashiach. No, not for them. For some Jewish people, Messianic Jews, he's Yeshua HaMashiach, the anointed Christ, right? But for the majority of Judaism, Orthodox, Reformed Jews, they don't believe in Jesus. So how could we be celebrating the same Passover that represents Christ as they are? So we're not. So there's a slight difference. Bread and wine suggests body broken, bloodshed, redemptive work of Christ. Salvation history is renewed and provided for the believer. So there we go.
Wow.
And Christmas. Shall I do that one?
Yes, please.
Now, Christmas is always been about the birth of Christ. You're not going to find the Bible, oh, Jesus said to celebrate my birth. But we know it was celebrated. The wise men came, the Magi's, they came and celebrated his birth. By the way, there were not 3 wise men. You might be, and those who are watching.
Everyone says the 3 wise men.
No, even the postcards or the Christmas cards are wrong. There's not 3 wise men. We don't know how many there are, right? We say, even though we say the Magi's, sometimes I say the 3 Magi's, but it could be 4, it could be many. There were 3 gifts, not 3 wise men. The 3 is applicable to gifts, not the wise men. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Yeah.
So we don't look in the New Testament Gospels. No, what you can't find any the 3 wise men. Right? Even in the plays, and I've done the plays in our churches, we have done all that stuff. But we have to. Excuse me. The thing is, Ugona, we must be honest with the text. If we're teaching or preaching something and we look back at the text after years and we found out, what I was doing was wrong, it's not the text that must change.
It's us. We
must change. So those are my views. So Christmas, in terms of its celebration, angels announce his birth. So the idea is, do we find act of celebration of Christ's birth in the New Testament? Absolutely in the Gospels. Luke's account of the birth narratives and also Matthew's account. So we're going to, so what's wrong with celebrating Christ's birth? Let me tell you what Christians have done, and this is a problem we've done in history, and we need to reverse it in my humble opinion. In history, let's start there first. In history, we have relegated Christianity to the secular world. And they took over science, they took over medicine, and they took over all the disciplines, anthropology, social, and now we're Christians clawing it back and getting upset when the world changed the rules. No, we have given them. Because a lot of what we were doing was also popularly done in the church. Einstein, a lot of the scientists, where do you think they were? They were also Christian. Part of the church, right? So to go back to Christmas, what a lot of people have done, Ugona, I'm glad for this interview because hopefully it will highlight some things and force people to do further research rather than swallowing hook, line, and sinker what everybody else says. What has happened is that we have allowed the commercialization of Christmas right, the economic thrusts behind Christmas, money making, to overshadow the real meaning of the birth narratives.
Yes.
And we sat back and calling it paganism while the world is messing up. Two of them, let me tell you this, the most important celebration of festivals in Christianity is Easter and Christmas, and the birth representing the incarnation. If you don't believe it, you can't be a Christian. And the death representing the resurrection. If 1 Corinthians 15 says, if Christ be not risen, our preaching is vain, our faith is vain, and we are yet in our sin. So if you don't celebrate those, if you don't believe those two, you are outside of the faith. So you must believe in resurrection, and you must believe in the incarnation. Do you see if I become a little bit more spiritual on my spiritual side rather than academic here, do you see what the devil tries to attack? He attacks incarnation and even uses Christian to do it. And he attacks resurrection. You get rid of those, we have no Christianity. And lastly, which Jewish person you hear telling you they're getting rid of Sukkot or getting rid of Yom Kippur or getting rid of all these Rosh Hashanah? Which Muslim are getting rid of Eid that they just finished celebrating? Which of them are getting rid of the Jummah prize on Friday or going to the masjid? Or, they're not getting rid of that. But Christians, oh no, we don't want Christmas. We don't want Easter. Just let's exist as we are.
Wow. So I have another question. What about things like Christmas trees? Because I've heard some, pastors say that Christmas trees are demonic and...
Yeah. And I'm shaking my head already because again, I've got some articles on these. They're kind of Facebook articles, but I'm quite happy to tag you into them, and then you can feel free to share them with whomsoever. I've actually done about 5 articles on Christmas by itself.
Wow.
Including one on Jeremiah chapter 10, which has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the Christmas tree. The guy who went in the forest and cut out the tree and bring it in his home and decked it with gold and silver was not talking about a Christmas tree. Actually, if you study the background to why we have gold and silver on the trees that we have, because they used to use eggs. I think it was eggs at the time. Something shaping, I can't remember the exact story, so let me not go there if I don't have the full story. But nonetheless, in the article, I point out that the Christmas tree is distinct and different, was created in Germany, all because of a Christian who went outside and saw the stars and saw the light and decided to hang the star because they're representative of the light, Christ being the light of the world. It has nothing to do with paganism. The tree itself, look at Jeremiah 10, right? What Jeremiah 10 was talking about is not a Christmas tree. He's talking about people who go and cut wood in the forest to make an idol. The Bible says they have eyes but they do not see. They have mouth but they do not speak. You don't see a Christmas tree with eyes. Any day you see a Christmas tree with eyes, listen, I'm not sitting around to wait. I'm out of here. Christmas tree don't have eyes, they don't have mouth. So the tree in Jeremiah has nothing to do with Christmas whatsoever. Hundreds of years long before we have the invention by the Germans of the Christmas tree. And Christians, by the way, are the ones that did it. Wow. Isn't it interesting? We again, Ugona, we're consistently given Christian festivals, Christian rites, Christian ritual, our rites of passage, and we are letting the world tell us what we can and can't celebrate and agreeing with them.
Wow.
So that's problematic for me.
So as a biblical scholar, what's your view on, obviously with what's going on with, Israel and Palestine?
Right.
There are many Christians who, are supporting Israel, many Christians that are not supporting Israel and are supporting Palestine. What's your view? What's your biblical view on it?
Okay. When we think about biblical Israel, whoever they are, right, because that's a big debate, because the Hebrew Israelites think black people are the Israelites. And that comes from, by the way, the Ethiopian Jews called Beta Israel, Beta and Israel. It is argued that they were the original Jewish people and so on and so forth. And the Ashkenazi Jews, the white-looking Jews, they're not the Jewish people from Europe. They're not the genuine Jews. I'm not doing that. But let's take for granted whoever the Jews are. I believe Jewish people are God's people, right, in that sense. But I don't affirm the actions of all Jewish people as godly. So I need to make that distinction. Not because Israel, I'm not going to do, and I don't want to get myself in trouble, I'm not doing a John Hagee, and saying that we're defending Israel at any cost. I am not doing that. I would point out, as a Christian who support Judaism, in that sense. Where Jewish people are wrong, they are wrong. Where Christians are wrong, they're wrong. Where Muslims are wrong, we are wrong. Where we're right, we're right. And we can argue that the land belonged to Israel biblically, and I believe that is so, right? And Israel has a right to the Palestinian covenant that was made between David and 4,000 years ago or whatever. All that, we could do all that stuff, right? And I would agree with that. And I'm not anti-Semitic in any way. I'm actually, in that sense, supporting biblical Judaism. But what I'm not supporting is inhumanity. I do not believe in the dehumanization of any human being. So how Israel treat the Palestinians, I would disagree with that in a lot of different ways. I would also disagree with how Palestinians react to Israel as well in many different ways. I've also had experiences with friends of ours who are from Ethiopia and a part of the Beta Israel, the black Jews, who have migrated to Israel itself. So they're from Ethiopian migrant, and they have been discriminated against. So what about the issue of racism? What about the issue of discrimination and so on? And this is not something to be denied when the persons who are there are actually telling you, we are experiencing this. So either we it's like a person told you that they were abused and you take the abuser's word over the person who's been abused. You see? And so we have to listen to what people have to say. And so maybe it's I'm not a socialist in that sense, but I am passionate about social justice and equality and fairness. And I'll put it this way, and this will answer the question between what's going on in Israel at the moment. Ugona, we have. Can I borrow your phone for a minute? If I use that, these are, and this is an iPhone, right?
Yes.
And mine is an iPhone. We have two iPhone here, and we could say the iPhones are equal, right? So if I give you £20, two persons £20, I would be demonstrating equality, but equality is not equity, because your bill might come to 500 and mine only 50. So even though our phones are equal, it's not equitable.
Yeah.
So you could give a person who is rich, right, £20, and a person who's poor £20. You're doing it's equality, but it's not equity. It's not fair. Because the person who is poor is going to struggle on £20 than the person who is rich. You see what I mean? Yeah. So we've got to be fair. So when you think about Israel and the Palestinian people and their displacement and they're all over the place, we need to, as Christians, also have a heart not just for Palestinian people, but for people. And I wish the world would stop demonstrating what I call selective empathy. Because in Rwanda, 800,000. I think it was 800,000. I can't remember the exact. I think something about. You know how many people died? I mean, why wasn't there outcry? I mean, and so on and so forth. So, and then I could bring in the issue of how Africans are treated as opposed to, if you have a different hue of your skin and all that stuff. So we have selective empathy.
Yes.
So if you're from Ukraine, you can come into our homes, but, if you are from Nigeria and you lived in Ukraine, you are not welcome. Go back to Nigeria. So we've got, and I'm talking about Christians, we must not exemplify selective empathy. If God has called us to love, we must love all people, irrespective of race, class, or who you are.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had a question which was about us Africans. So as Africans, there seems to be this view on religiosity that we have to pick up, this religion and drop our own practices, drop our own traditions, drop our own cultures, look at them like they're evil, and then pick up a religion of people who didn't even treat us as human beings in the past. So what's your view on that?
All right. Well, when we think about our African ancestry, because a lot of people in the modern Christian context, they're going back to our ancestors.
Yeah.
Now, there are dangers in that, right? In going back to our ancestors, like praying to our ancestors from a Christian perspective. But we have got to be careful how we reapproach or reappropriate African tradition and read it through the lens of westernized Christianity. Because the Western perspective, Ugona, of Christianity in Africa has always been, until most recently, negative. The things we do must be critiqued. Our traditions must be critiqued. If anyone needs to change, you must change. And when some of the missionaries, remember we have done an interview on that, no, the missionaries did not bring Christianity to Africa. It was already there. But when some of the missionaries came to Africa, they came with the mindset of colonialism. let's educate them. Because these guys, though they build the pyramids, they don't have much cognitive ability. So let's educate them, right? And that's incorrect. And sometimes we still have residue of that, even in context of university, where we think that we're going to Africa to educate. We're reading theology through Western eyes, and Africans need to follow the way we read Christianity. No, we do not, because Christianity was in Africa, our brand of it. But in doing that, there are some ancestral practices that are rejected in our old traditions, not just ours. One of them is witchcraft, in the sense of blatantly setting out to harm others. And so you could argue from a biblical perspective, if you're engaged in a practice with the intention of harm, then that is rejected, right? Now, there are also certain practices that are virtually unbiblical. And the unbiblical nature of it in the New Testament is this. Christ has called us to preach the gospel. In the New Testament, in Romans, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek, and to all these groups of people. He required no additions to the gospel. So as Christians, we must, if we're biblical Christians, we must follow the pattern of scriptures, that we don't add to the New Testament salvation that was not added in the early church. So I find when we start adopting cultural practices, right, and making them mandatory, like you've got to light 15 candles before you can experience this numinous divine, you've got to be careful when you start doing those things. So burning sage, doing all these things to connect with the divine is not something that the Bible requires of you as a Christian, right? And can lead you down to the path of unbiblical practices. So that's what we would say with our culture. But we need to celebrate our art. Our statues are not demonic. Our carvings are not demonic, even though we know there is a place in Jamaica, where I'm from, and where I was born, we have a practice that was called a parade, and on the parade we have Jakunu, I think it's called, a practice that came from Ghana, where they would wear particular scary mask and stuff like that, a masquerade. That's what we call masquerade. And in that, we didn't know what it meant when we were children, but now we do, because masks carry a sense of embodiment of the ancestors. So that's why, we used to laugh at it and enjoy the parades, but now we recognize not that the tradition is bad for the whole culture, but from a Christian worldview, if the mask is believed to embody the ancestor, then we are evoking the deceased and engaging the dead. And that's a practice rejected in scripture. So there are things which we encourage, and there are other things which we may say, no, we don't celebrate. But the Christian African culture, listen, we are rich in culture. We are our liturgy, our worship, our dance, our ways of doing things must not be secondary to no other culture. Because in heaven, in fact, I think in Acts it says, God has made of all nations one blood.
And my final question, is Christianity a white man's religion?
Absolutely not. And we could go just in a generic way, talk about that. The first place Jesus was taken by his mother was where? Egypt. Where is Egypt? North Africa. Okay, let's do another one. It looks like black people always carry crosses. We always get in the bitter end of the stick. So we have Simon of Cyrene, who helped Jesus to carry the cross, and he was an African as well. Cyrene is in Africa. We have Apollos in Acts chapter 18, verse 24 onwards. He was a Jewish African who studied at one of the universities in Alexandria.
Wow.
Athanasius, right, in our church fathers, Tertullian, a lot of the early church fathers, and we could go on and on. Guess who they were? Africans. The Ethiopian eunuch on the Queen Kandake, right, which we call Candace in English, Kandake, right? She was a Nubian queen for 3 African kingdoms very quickly. The Nobata kingdom, the Aladea kingdom, and the Mokuria kingdom. These are Christian kingdoms, right? And so Christianity was all over Africa. St. Mark is believed to be one of the disciples that also took the gospel to Africa.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Marvin.
Pleasure.
Honestly, this has been very enlightening.
Yeah.
So just as we round up, there's one thing we normally do at the end of each episode. I've got 3 numbers. You need to pick one of them. And whatever you pick, you have to do.
Okay.
So number 1, number 2, or number 3?
I'll go 1.
Number 1. Okay. Number 1, that means you have to rap for us.
Gee.
Ready? 3.
Oh my goodness.
2.
Wait. You have to press to be blessed, and why second for the less when you can get the best? Put God to the test and watch him bless. I'm blessed in the city and blessed in the field. Blessed when I come and blessed when I go. You are blessed.
Wow. That was really good. Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you
Marvin.
too.
It's been amazing having you in the studio today.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
So for those of you out there, if you go to the description, you'll find links to some of his articles that he's mentioned during the interview. So you can have a read there, do as much research as you need to. You can also find some of his books. Well, if you have access to a library in a university, then you might find a copy of this book, and you could just read and get all the information you need to about theology. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us what you think about Dr. Marvin and all the knowledge that he's put out there. So thank you very much. See you guys later. Take care.
Thank you.